Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. I am dressing up for this because this will be my final episode for the Joseph Smith papers. I have been tempted to maybe do some supplementary things, but for now, I wanted to say thank you. This is the end, and the end of not only the papers that we have, but also the end of Joseph Smith's life and the history that we're covering, and the end of this very intense journey that I've been on for a while because it's a lot to write, historical lectures based on actual events and stuff. So, and the research that I've done it's been a lot, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful to you. I really do. Today we're going to be talking about what we've now termed Doctrine and Covenants, section 135, which is the announcement of the death of Joseph Smith and his brother Hyrum in Carthage Jail in 1844. We're going to be covering sort of a short period. This is going to be mostly from Documents Volume 15 from the Joseph Smith Papers. This is the very last published volume that they ever put out. And this goes from the 16th of May all the way through to the 28th of June, 1844, which is more or less when Joseph Smith was shot. Um, so I'm going to try to make this as interesting as possible, of course. And I'm going to actually be beginning, this first part is going to be basically volume 15. We're going to be talking about the last moments, the last months. Basically, we're covering about a month and a half, really. There's a lot that flies around as Joseph's trying to preserve his life. And so we're going to jump into those documents, and hopefully this will be of interest to you and kind of give you the reasons why Joseph was in Carthage at the time and what brought him there and what brought his brother there. Why is Willard and John in the room, and all of this kind of stuff. And then I have decided on doing something that I thought would be a little bit more special about the announcement of Joseph Smith's death by how we're going to present the announcement of that through Willard Richards and John Taylor's words. So for now, let's get into it, to the final moments of Joseph Smith's life and the final documents volume in the paper series. All right. Let's go through the remaining stuff. We start this one off with a shot to the Central Committee of the National Reform Association on May 16th. And that's a mouthful. But anyway, this is published in the Nauvoo Neighbor, and Joseph Smith describes that those who work the land should earn their own, and that there should be a uniform land law, and that labor should be fairly compensated for their work, so that the ones who control capital don't control the country, which is explored and kicked around for a while in Europe. Very unrelated, but this is something that leads to Marxism, communism, and anti-capitalist and anti-monarchy revolutions. That's a very different podcast. But this whole idea of we need to be redistributing this and allowing, labor to have what it needs so that capitalists don't just own all of the stuff, and, labor unions and all this kind of stuff. So it was well ahead of his time, but this kind of idea was very popular and prevalent. And, Karl Marx came up with this, and that led to communism and things like that, socialism and so forth. Which I suppose you can have your own views on, but I just thought it was interesting that these were the ideas at the time. Anyway, we get some mounting legal issues Joseph is dealing with, including a plea he had to file because of an issue with Alexander Simpson, who charged him with defamation. They put in for a change of venue because Joseph was not going to go to Missouri, and the suit didn't go anywhere because Joseph was actually shot before they got to take it to trial. So there's that. We also get an account of a meeting on the 23rd of May with the Sauk and Meskwaki nations of Native Americans. This one is a fragment and kind of tough to read. So the historical introduction gives us this. It says, hoping to avoid a full-scale war, a delegation of the Sac and Fox leaders, as they called them, made an agreement in 1804 with Indiana Territorial Governor William Henry Harrison to cede part of their land in exchange for the return of an American Indian prisoner. Resentment over that treaty appears to have been a key factor behind the 1832 Black Hawk War, which resulted in tribes being forced to cede to the United States 1.25 million acres of land in present-day Iowa. So this is a little bit about where we're coming to. This is an interesting relationship, and why they wind up going to Joseph. It says from the historical introduction, church members had a special affinity towards Native Americans, believing them to be descendants of a people known in the Book of Mormon as Lamanites. And I will add for myself that both the saints and these tribes were driven out both of their lands and knew those pains and injustices and what they were, albeit they were under very different circumstances. But yeah, this whole idea that, like, these are two groups of people who have both been kicked out of their lands by the United States government. Anyway, the end of the meeting went a little something like this. Keokuk stated that Joseph Smith was a great and good man, and asserted that while he himself might look rough, he was also a son of the Great Spirit. He then told Joseph Smith that they intended to follow his advice to stop fighting. The meeting concluded with a feast, and the Sac and Fox entertained the spectators with a specimen of their dancing. So, seems like a good relationship between the two here, so which is kind of fun. All right, and wouldn't you know it, John Wentworth shows up again. If you remember, the Wentworth letter is the thing that gives us the Articles of Faith. Well, bro is now a first-term congressman from Illinois. He was actually meeting with Orson Hyde and trying to push through this memorial that they had. He tried to get the memorial and petition read on the House floor, so he's a representative instead of a senator, which Joseph Ingersoll objected to. So it was sent to a committee, which also failed. Anyway, so all of this in a letter from Mr. Wentworth. So apparently they had sort of a good relationship. What follows is a massive pile of pleas and suits and court filings and everything else these people could cook up on both sides to try to pull Joseph into court, have him sued for money or extradited to Missouri. It seems like more and more were ready to pull him down, take him for whatever they could, or kill him. There's way too much to share, but both sides are using the law as much as possible to win their own side. On top of this, Joseph is suing the Street Brothers for money associated with the Maid of Iowa that they all sort of owned together and they were sharing the profits on. People were not paying up, so we sue with the law. And history keeps repeating itself in America. It would seem that's how we do it. We don't get our money, we sue with the law. Anyway, we got a lot of habeas corpus findings flying around to allow Joseph to stay out of state custody or jail. We get bonds, we get letters, we get deeds, we get receipts. But all land in the capable hands of the Joseph Smith Papers team, where we enjoy them. Or you can, if you want to scour the sites and publish volumes and look through all this stuff, but we're going to skip it. Things in Texas are warming up, and we get a letter from John H. Walton on the 3rd of June, which starts talking about selling lands in Texas around the northern part, which is between the Red and Trinity Rivers. He also thought that Texas would be great for them, including the idea of having the majority of vote wherever they wound up landing. So that was interesting. It's sort of wooing the saints to come to Texas. We get a readmission letter to Abijah R. Tewksbury on the 4th of June. He was excommunicated for being associated with Parsons and his society, which took a militant approach to vice and society and smacks of a secret society, or what Latter-day Saints would call a secret combination. Anyway, that was the vibe. This letter was letting him know that he has permission to be baptized and that Elder Nickerson in that area was able to perform that baptism and he could rejoin the church. So, again, something that still happens in church culture today is if you want to be rebaptized, you would have to go to the missionaries or to take the lessons again and join the church after you are allowed, which is kind of fun. So Abijah Tewksbury rejoins the church. And I don't know if you remember, this is way back in the beginning of the Filling in the History series, but we get the book, Hey Passa Ecclesia. This is where we get a different version of the first vision. Well, Daniel Rupp mailed a copy of it with much gratitude to Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith actually responds on the 5th of June, thanking him and commending the team for their efforts. So that was kind of fun. Like, he was able to send out like, hey, what are you all about? John Wentworth did the same thing, and he gets a copy back and he says, hey, thank you for being a part of this project, and sends him a copy. So I think that's kind of fun. Joseph actually has to send out, I thought this was fun. He had to send out a notice that any money that you get from the Kirtland Safety Society is bogus and that the institution is long gone and the money is no good. So don't accept it. So I thought that was interesting. Oliver Cowdery, one of the reasons why he was excommunicated is he was being accused of counterfeiting Kirtland Safety Society bills. This is separate from that, but basically Joseph is saying, hey, once again, Kirtland Safety Society is not a thing, so don't buy it. Don't get into that stuff. All right, now we get into the publication of something called the Nauvoo Expositor. No big whoop. Just a group of people who think the saints are to be driven out, that the Nauvoo charter needs to be revoked outright, and slandering anything they can get their hands on for the church. Now, this is not a joke. This sort of thing follows the church everywhere. And to this day, there are still publications, a newspaper that is, in my mind, that is still in print, that started as stating as their only purpose was just to be an anti-Mormon publication. And anyway, a lot of these have actually kind of diversified over the many, many years. Some of these papers have been around for more than 100 years. And they still do their thing, just like this. And anything the church does, they're the first ones to just call it crap or mock it or make a light of it or whatever. But they also do other stuff as well. But that is a thing that was a thing then, and it's still a thing now. It's just the way it is. And this paper and its press becomes a major item in the last days of Joseph Smith. More on that much later. So this whole Nauvoo Expositor thing, this paper that gets one copy out, turns into a major problem for everyone involved. Before that, we get a letter from Orson Hyde on the 9th of June, which addressed his removing Joseph Smith and his military leadership from the memorial to Congress. He sort of pulled back on that. He said he was sorry. And this letter probably actually never made it to Joseph before he surrendered to authorities and wound up in Carthage Jail. But Orson sort of tried to make things right there. Now we get to the beginning of the end. Now, for me personally, the death of Joseph Smith is a major important thing, but I would argue that June 10th is also a very big day. So here we go. This is on June 10th, all of this. The Council of 50 meets to discuss this Nauvoo Expositor newspaper, which is seen as a libelous print and is exciting the enemies of the church further and engendering violence against the city of Nauvoo. Mormon or not, it was just Nauvoo in general. All for this, the council gave their ideas and agreed that the paper is a public nuisance and needs to be removed. So one by one, council members would get up, and all of them were like, yeah, it's bad, it's got to go. And the next person, yeah, I think it's horrible, it needs to be destroyed, whatever. This leads to a series of legal paperworks to destroy the Nauvoo Expositor press. So in short, we get the meeting minutes, then we get a city ordinance. Because of that ordinance, we get a resolution. Then we get an order from the mayor and a military order to destroy the press. And then after all that, Joseph gives a discourse in front of his home approving of the group's actions that, took out this press. And that speech was hailed with 3 cheers. So I'm condensing that. So let's dive in a little bit more. The minutes allow all people involved to touch on what they think, as we said before. So this was not just Joseph Smith saying, I hate this paper, call out the mob and kill it. That's how it's presented. No, this was a group of people in the Council of 50, city people, whether they were Latter-day Saints or not. All of them kind of felt that this was the way to go. So then we get an ordinance specifying that any libelous publications are not welcome in Nauvoo. And because they passed that ordinance in the meeting, it gives the council power to vote on a resolution that made the Nauvoo Expositor a nuisance under the recent ordinance. So it's like, hey, we have an ordinance for this. Oh, look, you violated that ordinance, right? And they then they resolved to say, okay, Joseph Smith, you're the mayor. You are ordered to dispatch a posse to go and take care of it. This order came in the form of a document that Joseph authorized to have the city marshal, whose name is John P. Green, get a group of people together to destroy the press. And the order reads thusly: To the marshal of said city greeting. You are hereby commanded to destroy the printing establishment press from whence issues of the Nauvoo Expositor, and pie the type of said printing establishment in the streets, and burn all the expositors and libelous handbills found in said establishment. And if resistance is offered to your execution of this order by the owners or others, demolish the house, and if anyone threatens you or the mayor or the officers of the city, arrest those who threaten you, and fail not to execute this order without delay, and write on and return thereon by order of the city council, Joseph Smith, mayor. So basically they're saying, once you're done, we need you to write on the rest of this paper that you, fulfilled your orders. This also leads to a military order that Joseph authorizes as the Lieutenant General of the Nauvoo Legion to have the Legion assist in the destruction of the press if they're needed. So basically he's saying, hey guys, I need you to stand by. And if, John P. Green and his group, as they start, destroying the press and burning bills and all this kind of stuff, if they run into an issue, you're to run in there and assist. You're the backup. So the aftermath of this whole thing is threefold. The first one is those involved with the expositor made many threats in response to this action. So from the historical introduction to the proclamation printed the next day, this is a proclamation saying, hey, by the way, this happened last night and this is why we did it. But before we get into that, it says this. That evening on June 10th, a posse led by Green carried out the order, and several of Joseph Smith's enemies threatened to retaliate by demolishing the temple, burning down Joseph Smith's home, or tearing down the Nauvoo neighbor's printing office. Francis M. Higbee, for instance, stated that, quote, if they lay their hand upon it, meaning the expositor's press, or break it, they may date their downfall from that very hour, and in 10 days there will not be a Mormon left in Nauvoo, unquote. So that was number one. We get a lot of threats. Number two, the posse did actually and successfully destroy this press. Burn the bills, destroy the press, and that actually happened. And then the third one is that a proclamation was printed in the Nauvoo neighbor calling on all city officers and citizens to keep the peace and defend it. Meaning, all right, this was a shot across the bow. I need everybody to be on the lookout and defend us if we need it. So there you go. That is the Nauvoo Expositor. They printed one issue, mailed it out across the country. The city came in and destroyed the press because they felt it was a disturbance to the peace. And this is the impetus behind basically everything that leads Joseph back to Carthage Jail. And I guess a lot of people felt it was justifiable enough to kill him. So that is the event. So we end this little portion with a letter from Orson Hyde on June 11th, which describes how the memorial has failed in the House and the Senate, that Orson petitioned President Tyler directly and was outright rejected as well. And he concluded his letter stating that the government is no longer a viable option for redress and kind of is asking what to do. So that date again is June 11th. And as you may have heard before in a previous episode, the memorial that they sent was kind of shot down in the Senate around the end of May. So, but he made it all the way after the House, the Senate, he made it to the president, and it's just absolutely not under no way, no how, no nothing from anybody. It's crazy. I will mention that we have gone now from years to months, and now we're going to days in the Joseph Smith papers. So we've made it to the last volume of the documents of the Joseph Smith papers. So part one, there's parts to these volumes. Part one and two covered a matter of weeks, actually. Now we're going to get into part three, which covers only 9 days. Part four of this volume covers only 3 days. And part five covers the last 4 days of Joseph's life. So there is a barrage of letters and documents trying to escape charges. They're trying to protect Nauvoo and the Saints, petitioning everybody up to the President of the United States again. And it is almost a panic of papers flying about to try to just preserve their lives. All right, so probably not to anybody's surprise, Joseph Smith gets arrested for his part in the Nauvoo Expositor abatement, as they called it. He petitions the court under habeas corpus so he doesn't have to stay in jail. And that is successful, which means now his enemies say that he is resisting arrest and defying the law. This makes the surrounding towns call for exterminations of Mormons in their areas as well, which starts to surround Joseph and his people from all sides. We have the arrest warrants, the docket, and the appeals to the court in the Joseph Smith papers. There is an interesting footnote to this docket and the accompanying back and forth for arrests and such. So this is footnote 108 for this docket, describes James Jackson, who was sworn in and testified, quote, in Joseph Smith's 12th of June, 1844 habeas corpus proceedings regarding the orderly manner in which the posse destroyed the press, he recalled that Francis M. Higbee and Charles A. Foster were the only people causing confusion, as they used blackguarding language against the posse and the city leaders. Now, that's under oath. That's in the municipal records of this time. So this is not like a church thing. Apparently, some guy walking by was like, no, like, they were actually kind of calm and quiet and orderly about the whole thing, and it was just these two guys that were flipping out about it. which kind of makes sense. It's their press. But everybody, it wasn't like they, dressed up and whooped and hollered and did whatnot. They just kind of took it down and dismantled it like they were ordered to do. So according to him, according to this man. So after this is all said and done, Joseph sits down and after being let go from court, and he writes to Governor Ford of Illinois to explain what happened, wraps it up in some corroborating stories that he also had people write, stated he kind of offers that if he needs to come and be taken in for trial, he would go along with that. So he basically goes back to Thomas Ford and says, hey, just so you know, this is what happened. If you want me to come in, I will, but we destroyed this press. They printed stuff. This is what they were printing. We felt like that was dangerous, so we destroyed it. We feel like that's within our rights. The letter made it to Thomas Ford, and the historical introduction from Volume 15 says this. John Taylor remembered that Ford opened and read a number of the documents himself, though he was frequently interrupted by others surrounding him who objected to the statements in the letters, claiming they were falsehoods. So John Taylor hand delivers this to Governor Ford, and he can't even get through it without everybody being like, like fiddling out. And like, to me, I would have just been like, guys, shut up and let me just read this letter. So, anyway. Much goes back and forth about these trials and the destruction of this press. I will say that the legality of what Joseph did has been validated in modern times, like now, but critics, even from modern times, still point to this as a moment of evil on the part of the saints and that they did something wrong. Now, I'm not a legal expert, but I just want to let you know, like, this whole idea that, like, what kind of pushed Joseph into a life-threatening situation was either his own fault, if you're not a fan of the church, and you can point to that as like a violation of freedom of the press and all that stuff, and it just proves how evil he really was, or you can say, actually, there was a lot of this going on at the time. It's very legal at the time, and it was something that was very much allowed. So I'm not a legal expert, but that is the argument. To this day, this is still kind of a hot-button topic. So anyway, on the 16th of June, Joseph finds the time to discourse on the nature of God, which is interesting that he would have the time to do that. There is a general sense that he was defending himself against what the expositor had published, and used a lot of scriptures, the quotes that proves his belief that God is a personage with a body, and that Joseph knows this through the Holy Ghost and independent revelation. There are 3 versions of this discourse, but Thomas Bullock gives us pages of material. Joseph points to the idea that the name of God, which is Elohim, is a plural word. You could take cherub and cherubim. Cherubim is the plural of cherub. Anyway, this implies that there are more than one God, and some have pointed to this as the proof, actually, of heavenly parents. So if you're not familiar with Latter-day Saint theology, you have a heavenly Father. I think we all kind of point to that, and a lot of people say that's Elohim. You have Jesus Christ, which is also Jehovah. You have the Holy Ghost. But there is also a heavenly mother, and that we have parents, that it's male and female. Again, I'm not sure if it's birthed in the same way, but that we are all their children. So Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother. And that's one theory, is that the idea of Elohim being the name of God is actually referring to more than one God, instead of just an individual Heavenly Father. So anyway, take that as you will as well. Just a theory. Things continue to deteriorate. We start getting reports from Isaac Morley that threats are being made outside of Nauvoo to the saints after the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor press. Joseph writes this to Governor Ford and starts in earnest to ask for state protection for Nauvoo. Joseph felt that having the governor on site with his staff would ward off an attack from their enemies, right? You're not going to kill the governor, like the commander-in-chief of the state of Illinois. So anyway. Reports keep coming from surrounding settlements, and Joseph issues orders to the police as mayor and to the Nauvoo Legion, because he was the lieutenant general, to stand ready to defend from any groups coming after them from any quarter. So he's like, everybody stand ready. It could come at any time from any direction. It was at a fever pitch over there. On June 18th, we get a discourse from Joseph to the Nauvoo Legion, having them stand ready for an attack on the city. A little later, a proclamation is written and declared, and it is this. Mayor's Office, City of Nauvoo, June 18, 1844, proclamation. From newspapers around us and the current reports as brought in from the surrounding country, I have good reason to fear that a mob is organizing to come upon this city and plunder and destroy this said city. as well as murder the citizens. And by virtue of the authority vested in me as mayor and to preserve the city and lives of the citizens, I do hereby declare the said city within the limits of its incorporation under martial law. The officers, therefore, of the Nauvoo Legion, the police, as well as all others, will strictly see that no persons or property pass in or out of the city without due orders. Joseph Smith, Mayor. So now we are in martial law. All right. Letters start flying everywhere to try to get some help from anybody to stop these mobs that were amassing around them, according to the accounts, of course. We get a letter to John Tyler from Joseph Smith, which says this. City of Nauvoo, Illinois, June 20th, 1844. Sir, I have just enclosed to the governor of the state of Illinois copies of the enclosed affidavits and extra. I am sorry to say that the state of Illinois, not contented with robbing, driving, and murdering many of the Latter-day Saints, are now joining the mob of this state for the purpose of utter extermination of the Mormons as they have resolved. And now, sir, as President of the United States, will you render that protection which the Constitution guarantees in case of insurrection and rebellion, and save the innocent and oppressed from such horrid persecution? With great respect, I have the honor to be your obedient servant, Joseph Smith, Mayor. Wow. So, yeah, John Tyler does nothing, by the way. No one does a thing. Everybody's like, you're all making it up. It's just, it blows my mind. But anyway, there was a letter written to Brigham Young, but probably not sent, actually, letting him know of the dangers in Nauvoo. Brigham was doing his mission for the presidential campaign in the East, but he never actually got to see it as far as we know. The last letter we get from this part of the printed volume is from somebody by the name of Samuel McClanathan, who was possibly exploring a settlement for the Saints, including a map, which I found interesting, a little more west of where they were. Joseph never seemed to receive this letter and map, and it's kind of a bummer because this would have been another temporary spot for the Saints and kind of get them away from all these troubles that they were facing. And that's kind of the thing, is that to this point, again, we had a politician in our last episode say the same thing of, why don't you just leave the United States? Clearly everybody hates you here, which is not what you want to hear from your elected officials, but that's what they got. And that's what Samuel McClanathan, that's about as Scottish as you can get, is trying to do. All right, so we're going to move into part 4. This is only from the 21st to the 23rd of June in 1844. And in these 3 days, we get 16 documents. I'm going to skip a few of them for time, but it is now a volley of paperwork trying to preserve and protect anything that they could. We get a letter back from Governor Ford saying that he was in Carthage, Illinois, and set up a temporary headquarters there. When he arrived, there was a lot of armed people waiting to go in by force and pull out anybody that was a part of the printing press destruction for the Nauvoo Expositor, and probably not do legal things to them. Anyway, he asked that Joseph come to Carthage and explain his side of the story, and that he would be safe under the governor's protection. Okay, Joseph holds an emergency council meeting, and a packet of letters and affidavits are sent back to the governor, who does listen to both sides and decides that the press's destruction was totally not cool, and Joseph should turn himself in. A letter from Thomas Ford explains that he is no longer interested in the reasons for the destruction of the press, starts to lecture Joseph on some of the laws of Illinois because he was a judge, he was an attorney. And he also states that he cannot hold back this mob and that Joseph must surrender. This letter is handed back to the courier, who travels with John Taylor back to Nauvoo. So one of the reasons why John Taylor is in the room with Joseph is because he was kind of a main trusted courier for all of this communication. So that's why he was in Carthage Jail when Joseph was shot. And you can kind of see that he's kind of going back and forth with this between Governor Ford and Mayor Smith. So Joseph writes his response around midnight into the early hours of June 23rd. He's stating that he is convinced that they are well within their rights to destroy the press. The state needs to step in and protect these citizens, and that Joseph cannot leave his people to the mercy of a mob. And we get this from the letter, I quote, "But notwithstanding this, We would not hesitate to stand another trial according to your excellency's wish, were it not that we are confident our lives would be in danger. We dare not come. Writs, we are assured, are issued against us in various parts of the country. For what? To drag us from place to place, from court to court, across the creeks and prairies, till some bloodthirsty villain can find his opportunity to shoot us. We dare not come, though your excellency promises protection, yet at the same time you have expressed fears that you could not control the mob, in which case we are left to the mercy of the merciless. Sir, we dare not come, for our lives would be in danger, and in taking a view of, we are guilty of no crime. There's your response. All right, so Joseph and Hyrum then have this idea to bail and head to Washington for redress yet again. They were like, we're just going to cross this river, and they're going to head off. Joseph winds up sending a letter to Emma, telling her about people who owe him money and that she can use the land that he owns and the property that he owns to sell it to provide for herself and for the children. And he hopes that doesn't come to pass because he hopes to come home. But he knows that these men want to kill him. So that's fairly compelling that you're to the point where you're like, hey, by the way, this is the list of my current affairs. And I want you to use them to take care of yourself and your family. So, yeah. All right. Let's get to the final part. Actually, I'm sorry. Before that, we also get Joseph writing to like attorneys galore. Every attorney he can think of, it seems, to come to Carthage to help represent him and to find a way out of this whole legal mess. There are very, very short messages like this one that I'll show you here. They're trying to do this to gather a legal team to help Joseph cross this issue. Right. Now we come to the final part. My apologies. This covers the 24th through the 28th of June, 1844. And this is the end. On the 24th, Joseph decides to turn himself in, and his brother Hyrum decides to join him. We get a letter from Lyman White and Heber C. Kimball on the 19th, 20th, and 21st and 24th of June, expressing their success in gaining support for Joseph Smith as president from the more eastern states, which is just kind of crazy to think that there were people that were like, yeah, sure. And then 2 days later, he's dead. So that's a letter that we get from those apostles. Joseph writes a letter to Governor Ford letting him know that he will surrender and go with James Dunn, who was the captain of a militia group to Nauvoo. And he was ordered to, go with Captain Dunn to Nauvoo, have the Nauvoo Legion surrender their arms. And then Joseph would go to Carthage to see the governor and appear in court. So a military order is written to this effect. And all this was, as Joseph termed out in his letter. So he, rather than going into all the letters, basically says, I'm going to turn myself in, and I know you want me to basically disarm the only protection that these people have in Nauvoo. But that's what they did. They took away any protection they could possibly have. And then they took away their leader. So pretty tense, I think. I think there was a lot of people who were like, let's just go in there and shoot them all. Like they're unarmed. And the governor's no one's going to do anything. We always get away with this stuff. But to their credit, to all of their credit, they forbear. None of that happened, which is kind of cool. But at the time, it was very scary, I'm sure. So Joseph writes to Emma, lets her know that he made it to Carthage, that the governor addresses them as General Joseph and General Hyrum and treated him with a lot of respect. So he's like, I'm going to respect your titles and what you're doing, which I thought was pretty cool. Joseph does write a note to Governor Ford to come and have an interview with him so that he can finally tell his side of the story, like in person. And by the way, we are all in jail illegally according to procedures. They didn't do the procedures and the minimuses correctly, so that we really shouldn't even be here. Whatever. Anyway, Ford shoots back a note on the same page and just promises to visit him and talk, which they do. And the whole exchange is on the same paper. It goes like this. It says, Sir, I would again solicit your excellency for an interview, having been much disappointed in the past evening. I hope you will not deny me this privilege any longer, that then your public duties shall absolutely require. We, have been committed under a false minimus, and consequently the proceedings are illegal, and we desire the time may be hastened when all things shall be made right, and we released from this imprisonment, your servant Joseph Smith. And Ford responds very briefly. It says, The interview will take place at my earliest leisure today. Thomas Ford. And that happens. Thomas actually goes to the jail, and they're able to talk it out. And so Thomas Ford was one of Joseph's visitors while he was in jail in Carthage. More letters and pleas are sent out, lots of that. We get a few attorneys willing to hear the case and defend Joseph in court. They write to judges specifically to try to get them to talk through things to see how legal or illegal or dangerous the situation has become. It gets to the point where Joseph relates this in his letter to attorneys. He says, quote, "We are informed that Dr. Foster," this is Robert D. Foster, "has said that they can do nothing with us only by powder and ball, as we have done nothing against the law." He's like, well, they haven't really broken the law, but I want to kill him. Like, we just want him dead. I don't care anymore. That's kind of what Robert D. Foster said, if it's true. But that's the thing. That's the kind of language that Joseph is putting out there. So now we come, my friends, to the last 3 documents of the Joseph Smith Papers project as it pertains to Joseph Smith's life itself. There's a lot of other things outside of Joseph Smith's particular life, but these are the things that are attributed to him. The first one is a letter to Emma. Then we get a letter to somebody by the name of Orville Browning. And then we get a land patent. So the letter to Emma is written in Joseph's own hand, and it says, "P.S. Dear Emma, I am very much resigned to my lot, knowing I am justified and have done the best that could be done. Give my love to the children and all my friends, Mrs. Brower, and all who inquire after me. As for treason, I know that I have not committed any, and they cannot prove one appearance of anything of the kind. So you need not have any fears that any harm can happen to us on that score. May God bless you all. Amen. Joseph Smith." P.S. 20 minutes to 10. I just learned that the governor is about to disband his troops, all but a guard to protect us and the peace, and come himself to Nauvoo and deliver a speech to the people. This is right, as I suppose. So basically he's saying, all right, everybody go home. I'm going to Nauvoo, and I'm going to talk about this to that people. So there's that. Next thing you get. The letter to Orville is a request for his legal services, and we don't have any evidence of a response from him. The document is held by the Community of Christ. That's where we get this. And then we have this land patent, which is secured on July 11th. So way later, but it was something Joseph signed his name to. And this is by the time it was delivered back to him. But by this time, he was dead. So that is all of the Joseph Smith Papers, ending in Documents, Volume 15. Now, there you go. Documents 15, all the way to 1844. We can put that down. And ladies and gentlemen, I have taken you through the entire Joseph Smith Papers. That was exhausting. Now, there is an appendix in the account of Joseph Smith and Hyrum's deaths. So there's an appendix in Volume 15 that's what you know today as Section 135 of the Doctrine and Covenants. There's really not a lot there that we haven't already touched on. And the footnotes refer to 2 documents that are from Willard Richards and John Taylor. So instead of that, and out of respect for the fact that these are people who got murdered, what I'm going to do in the next part is just do what I call the survivors testify. And this is, I'm just going to read to you Willard Richards' account and John Taylor's account instead of Section 135. That you can read at your leisure, but these will include most of what you read in Section 135, but it will also fill in the history of 2 people who were in the room in a volley of gunfire. Pretty remarkable stuff. And so if you want to stick with us for that, this will be my final part for the Joseph Smith Papers, is going to be the martyrdom of Joseph Smith. So stick around.